we're going to be starting on the next phase of the build for Ukraine. We're going to be putting together the chassis. Now, when I build a kit, I like to treat every sub-assembly as a kit in itself. In which case, then you do it all sorts of detailing and everything with it. So we're going to treat this entire area here as a separate kit, assemble it, paint it, and let's see what we get. Now, this kit so far, from what I've seen, has been excellent. The only criticism, or one of the few criticisms I may have, is that they have a lot of gate attachment points to the parts. I mean, look at all of these going all the way across. Now, the one thing that does, well, the reason that may be a good thing is that it seems that it'll keep the parts perfectly straight when they're being molded. You can see on both sides here. Here, this one here has 3 gates attaching the part. Look at the exhaust, which may account for how straight and true everything I've seen from this kit has been so far. And everything seems to fit pretty well, with the exception of one part, which I discussed in the last video. So while that does mean there's a lot of cleanup to be done on each one of these little nubs that's left after you cut it, the odds that a part is going to be warped or bent is pretty low. So let's start separating all our parts. We have our chassis, which is built out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 parts, not counting the rear differential, which is 2 parts on itself. So let's get started on that. Alright, now I'm doing a lot of the cleaning up. Now, one thing that you have to take notice of when you're cutting all these nubs off is it's going to be really easy just to blow right through them without really noticing these small little details. Is that right here is an alignment pin that you're going to need. So when you cut this nub off, you got to be very careful and make sure you don't cut that little alignment pin off, as you're going to need that, at least as far as the instructions show. Alright, now that we've removed all our nubs, now it's just a question of cleaning off the remaining nub marks, and then doing a little sanding. I see a lot of opportunity to do some detailing here. I'm not even really sure what this is. So this apparently goes here. And here. I see. And you see the precise of the fit here. I mean, it just pretty much slots right where it belongs. This kit really is an incredibly precise kit. But now that I see where that goes, we are going to be painting this separately, as I think there's something I may want to play with on that. So now we know where this goes, this goes. We're just going to continue cleaning off the parts, and then I'll be back with more test fitting. Alright guys, I'm going to point out a couple things here. First, yeah, there's a lot of nub work on this kit, as based on all the attachment points for the gates on this kit, you can see how much you're gonna have to clean up. But one thing I did notice until I did a test fit of the first part, which I have to get it up, and there we go. I almost cut off that alignment pin. So exactly what I told you guys to look out for earlier, I almost just did now. Now you're gonna end up with a ton of these little nubs. So let's get them out here so we don't confuse it with our parts. You're gonna end up with a lot of them, so if you want to make some sprue glue, this is the kit to make it with. One thing I did notice is that this plastic just seems to be softer or more flexible, not as brittle as the styrene plastic from the other manufacturers. Whether that's a plus or minus, I don't know just yet. It really hasn't been a factor. Okay, now we're just going to clean all these nubs off. Now, as I was saying, at first I was not too happy with all of the gates and all the nubs that I have to clean off. But then I saw what they had done is that all of these gates and nubs are going to be on the part of this frame, which is actually going to be covered by the body, so you'll never even see any of this, as this is actually the gluing surface that's going to go attached to the chassis. So do you really have to go nuts and get this as smooth and make them invisible and blend them all in? Actually, you really don't, because you'll never see this again once it's attached to the chassis. So basically, you just have to get it cleaned enough so that you can glue it without any interference, and you're done. Alright, now when you put these inserts in, you're going to back it up right up to this nub right here, this pin here, and that's where you're going to align it. And as you can see, it's perfectly even with the end of the rail. There's no trimming, no need to do anything, as it's a perfect fit. I'm telling you, the more I work with this kit, the more impressed I am with it. Now these frame inserts are stiffening the frame here, which is, I'm sure, what they were intended to do on the real car. And here we have both our frame rails completed. Now one thing I was noting is that here on this front part of the frame, you have these two alignment pins here. My first question was, are they to align this part of the frame here, or here, or here? As the instructions are really kind of vague on that. So did a little trial fit on the chassis, and the pins are actually inserted right into the opening on the frame, like so. So you'll be gluing that together that way, and it aligns perfectly with the pin marks, and there's no slip, no slop in the connection. It's really well done. Now we'll clean up this other part that I don't even know what it's called. And yes, those gates all looked intimidating at first, but now that I'm working on the car, they're not really much of a factor at all. Now let's put the rear diff together, and we're right back to cleaning up all of our nubs. Let's say these Bandai Spirit nippers have come in very, very handy. I've used them on everything since I got them, and they're still pretty sharp and cutting pretty well. This is a beautifully detailed differential, which I am most definitely going to be doing a little bit of highlighting of certain things. May not be historically accurate, but I can't help myself. I see a bunch of details that I want to bring out in this once it's built. And who's to say this thing wasn't restored by a restoration shop? Give the Tamiya glue time to work and melt the plastic down a little bit. This is going to require a bit of work to remove the seam. This is another part that the instructions are slightly vague on, but I do see where they want you to go. Okay, now this piece here, which is the rear part of this frame reinforcement, connects right to a notch in the back of the frame here. Now the instructions again are a little vague on where that's gonna go. Well, on one side. No, I see it. Okay, this is actually in there. Now this is going to connect. Oh, okay. And this thin little piece is going to be a little tricky to clean up. I just don't want to take a chance on breaking it. And now our components are complete. We're going to go in for a wash and then ready for primer. Okay, now we're at the paint booth. We're going to start painting all of our components, starting with the frame rails. Now I'm going to paint the frame rails first, and then I'm going to go back, mask everything off, and do the springs, as they're going to be two different colors. Now, when I wanted to do the frame rails, I decided I'm not going to do the standard semi-gloss black, as, I don't know, I just wanted to try something a little different, maybe give it a little more of a steel-like look. So I found this really cool color from Tamiya called Dark Iron. So I picked that up and I decided, you know what, I'm going to try this in the dark iron, see what kind of a look I get. And it doesn't look it here because I'm just doing the initial coat to have a tack coat applied before I really start laying the color on. But it's an amazing color and really does give you an iron-like look. I was very happy with the final product, as you guys will see in a little bit. So let's just get painting. We're going to go over all of our parts and paint everything up. And then we'll get to the final product. Okay, here's where you see the color really start to come to life. Don't mind the background noise. That's just Mrs. Onyx Models deciding that she's Britney Spears again. That's okay. Now I'm starting to lay down the wet coats, and you really start to see this dark iron color start to pop. It really is an amazing color. I recommend it if you guys need to do any sort of metal work on your models. Now here we're going to start with the engine and transmission. Now for these two, I decided to go with my new Vallejo metallic colors, which are fantastic. I really like them. They spray very well and they have a really nice metallic look to them. What I'm using on the engine block is the Vallejo dark silver, and then I mean dark aluminum. And then for the transmission, I'll be using aluminum. And then we'll be doing some detailing. Now that the engine block is all done in the dark aluminum, I'm going to start spraying the Vallejo aluminum onto the transmission in order to give it a nice metallic look, but not too bright, which is one of the reasons I like this Vallejo aluminum. Now it's time to start with the oil pan. In this case, for the oil pan, I had originally intended to make it a metallic color, as I'm giving it a black base using MCW gloss black. Now this is my first time really spraying an MCW paint, and I really like the color. It's got a great, nice, shiny black to it. I had a little trouble with spraying it. I think that was more my fault than having anything to do with the paint. But overall, it covered very nicely and gave a nice black. I'm applying first a tack coat, and then the wet coats will come after that, just to totally darken the oil pan. I figured a black oil pan would give a little more visual interest instead of everything being the metallic tones. That's why I decided just to leave it black. Now, when I was looking at the chassis components, everything I had painted with the dark iron, I decided that the paint was just a little too flat. So I decided just to give it a coating of the semi-gloss clear from Tamiya, just to give it a little bit more of a sheen to the metal. My initial painting of the valve cover was just the airframe aluminum over the primer, but it didn't quite give me the shine that I wanted. So I decided to repaint it with the MCW gloss black, as you get the best shine out of these metallic colors when it's over a gloss black base. Now at this point I was considering putting a nice chrome look to the oil pan, and that's where I decided at this moment the fateful decision, I'm gonna leave it black. Let's just do something a little different on the bottom. Now comes the time to add a little color to the transmission. For that, I'm using the Alclad aluminum, say that 5 times fast, as it has a lighter metallic shade than the dark aluminum which I use for the engine block. I do this because I want to show the difference between the metals that are used between the engine block and the transmission, as they're not both aluminum. One is going to have a darker tone than the other. And here's a finished product where you can clearly see the difference in coloring between the two metals of the engine block and the transmission. This is exactly the look that I was going for. And then once you do a little shading and a little bit of detailing, should end up looking pretty nice. Now here is where we're going to start adding a little bit of shading to the rear differential. We're going to be using the all-clad burnt iron to darken the areas where the shadows would fall. It's very similar to what I did on the interior to give shadows to the leather on the seats, except that using the burnt iron on the metallic color will give it more of a used metal look and brings shadows to where the light actually wouldn't hit on the real object. It darkens up all of the recesses and the crevices that are in the component and gets really highlighted when we use the Tamiya panel line paint afterwards. I do this by spraying the burnt iron paint very, very lightly on the object and then slowly bringing the airbrush closer to darken the area up till I just get the slightly darker tint to the metal color. You don't want to paint over the metal color. You just want to change the tint of the color just to darken it a little bit. Now we're going to apply the exact same method to the engine and the transmission to create the shadows we're going to need for a realistic appearance. Alright guys, here you can see the results of all of our work. The engine, the base painting for the engine is completed. I've even added some details such as bolts and some of the bracketry on it. That's done in Model Masters brass, which I was lucky enough to find in my hobby shop. And the basic weathering of the engine is done. The accessories still have to be added, so there's still a lot more to go. Now we can take a look at the chassis. You can see the differential is finished. Going to be doing a little bit more weathering on that also. And you can see how it attaches to the leaf springs and how all of the little linkages attach from the springs to the roll bar. It's really a very nicely intricate crafted piece. This kit really is very, very well done. I am really impressed with it so far, and I'm really enjoying this build. Even all the details on the rear differential stand out. I highlighted a lot of it with the Tamiya panel line paint and the Model Masters brass for all of the bolts and bracketry. It's really, really a great piece.